A courier had been riding 8 days. He carried 2 things: news that the eastern provinces had declared for another emperor, and a saddlebag of letters, names of everyone who had known in advance. Marcus did not read them. Avidius Cassius was not an enemy. He was one of the most capable men Marcus Aurelius had ever elevated. He had won his reputation in the Parthian Wars. A decade of real campaigning, real command, real results. When Marcus needed someone to hold the entire eastern half of the empire while he went north to fight the Marcomanni tribes on the Danube, he chose Cassius, not a garrison post, sole command of every legion between Egypt and Syria. Cassius held that position for years, and in the spring of 175 AD, a false report reached him. Marcus was dead. Cassius did as he had planned. He declared himself emperor. The report was wrong. Marcus was alive, in the field, winning. But Cassius had crossed the line that could not be uncrossed. What arrived in that saddlebag was more dangerous than the revolt itself. The letters were intelligence, correspondence recovered from Cassius's headquarters, containing the names of men inside Marcus's circle who had known what was coming. Senators, officials, people with access. The man who could read every name was the Emperor of Rome. He chose not to open the bag. When you find out someone betrayed you, there is always a second question underneath it, and it is almost always worse than the first. Marcus knew exactly what the second question was. He decided not to ask it. He had months to reach the east. He marched from the Danube, and during the march, a story began to form. The story everyone expected. A Stoic emperor would forgive. Marcus had said as much. Historical sources record him praising Cassius's qualities, expressing a hope that Cassius would not harm himself before the pardon could be delivered. He was preparing clemency that Rome would talk about for decades. The philosopher king who extends mercy. The story had a shape. The rebel sees his error. The emperor demonstrates that his philosophy is not performance. The empire stays whole. Then the news came that Cassius was dead. He had not waited. His own officers, realizing the emperor still lived and the revolt had no future, had ended it themselves. The head of Avidius Cassius was brought to Marcus's camp. Marcus refused it. He refused to look at it, refused to receive the men who had brought it. He had spent months preparing a pardon. The question he had been ready to answer, "Will you forgive him?" was never asked. The question that arrived instead was different. How do you govern a court full of men who may or may not have known when you don't know which ones? There was the saddlebag. There were the letters. There were the names. Most emperors would have read every line. Power converts information into control. You read the names. You summon them in sequence. You watch your court rebuild itself around your knowledge of what each man did when the throne was contested. This is how you secure a reign. This is what information is for. Marcus had the letters destroyed without examining them. I read this the first time and thought it was the decision of a man who didn't want to know what his wife had done. There were rumors Faustina had been in contact with Cassius. Rumors Marcus never pursued. That reading is too small. He didn't burn the letters to protect specific people. He burned them because he understood exactly what knowing every name would require of him, and what that requirement would cost him over the remaining years of his reign. The meditations were being written during this same period, some sections dated to the Quadi campaign on the Danube, the same seasons as the revolt. Marcus left a record of how he thought about men who wrong those who have elevated them. Book 11. He wrote it not as philosophy, but as a checklist for himself. When you are offended by someone's wrongdoing, he says, work through these steps. The last step.
When at any time thou art offended with anyone's impudency, what art thou the worse for his sin? For thou shalt not find that any one of these, against whom thou art incensed, hath in very deed done anything whereby thy mind, the only true subject of thy hurt and evil, can be made worse than it was.
Marcus Aurelius. Your mind is the only thing Cassius could actually damage, not the throne, recoverable, not the eastern provinces, already reclaimed, not the armies, still loyal. The self Marcus had spent 20 years building, that was the asset no revolt could touch unless he let it. Then he wrote something that goes further. He wrote it about ingratitude, about men who received your generosity and did not return faithfulness. And it lands differently now, knowing what 175 AD looked like from the inside.
Thou thyself art much in fault. If either of one that were of such a disposition, thou didst expect that he should be true unto thee, or when unto any thou didst a good turn, thou didst not there bound thy thoughts, as one that had obtained his end, nor didst not think that from the action itself thou hadst received a full reward of the good that thou hadst done.
Marcus Aurelius. You did a good turn. If you expected faithfulness in return, that was a second transaction, one that Cassius never agreed to. The elevation was its own completion. What happened afterward was not a betrayal of your gift, it was the nature of the man, which you already knew, expressing itself when the conditions allowed it to. Marcus knew Cassius's nature. He elevated him anyway, because the command required someone of that ability, and because he believed the weight of trust might change what Cassius was. It did not. But Marcus had always understood this was possible. Reading the letters would not undo the revolt. It would only create obligations. Obligations to act on each name, to question, to prosecute, to watch. He was 53. He had years of reign ahead of him. Every interaction with every man in Rome would be filtered through what he now knew about who they were when the coin was in the air. He chose not to carry that. He didn't burn the letters to protect anyone in particular. He burned them to protect the kind of emperor he intended to remain. What looks like naivety from the outside is something else entirely. A precise calculation about what certain kinds of knowledge cost the person who holds them. Most advice on betrayal runs the same direction. Process the emotion, confront if necessary, draw the boundary. This is useful as far as it goes. Marcus was doing something prior to all of that. He was deciding, deliberately, what he was willing to know, because he understood that knowledge is not neutral. What you learn determines what you're obligated to do, and what you become obligated to do shapes who you are over time. First scenario. Someone on your team has been sharing your work with a competing group before you present it. You find out through a colleague. That colleague tells you there are written messages that others knew, that if you looked, you could reconstruct the full timeline of who was informed and when. Most people follow the trail, then they spend the next year carrying the complete picture, every conversation in the office filtered through what they now know about who stayed quiet and when. Marcus's question isn't about whether you have the right to look. You do. His question is, what does the complete picture change that you can actually act on? If the answer is nothing beyond what you already know, you're choosing to carry the weight of that information for reasons that serve your anger, not your position. Name what happened. Act on what you already know. Don't follow the trail further than your ability to use what you find. Second scenario. A close friend, Someone you've trusted for years said something about you to others that damaged how you were seen. You find out because a third person tells you. You could ask that person what else they heard. You could ask others in the circle if they knew. You could map the whole chain, or you can stop at the line Marcus stopped at. You have the fact. You have enough to understand what the friendship was and what it is now. Everything past that line is weight you choose to carry, not information you need. What Marcus did after the revolt, he pardoned Cassius's family. He refused the head of a man he had elevated and refused to admit the men who brought it. He destroyed the letters. Then he went east, received the provinces, and returned to Rome. He did not emerge trusting less. He governed the same. He held the same court, worked with the same officials, received the same advisors. He had chosen not to know which of them had waited to see how the coin fell, because carrying that knowledge for the next 5 years would have been its own kind of imprisonment. The most damaging part of any betrayal is not what was done to you, it's the investigation you begin afterward and how far you let it take you. Marcus made a choice that looks naive until you examine it carefully. He refused the head, pardoned the family, burned the letters, governed the same. This was not mercy as performance. He had worked through exactly what knowing every name would cost him over the remaining years of his reign, and he had calculated that it was more than it was worth. Next episode, some of Rome's most significant philosophers were exiled, removed from the city, from their resources, from the audience they had spent years building. The ones who survived didn't endure exile. They discovered that the person the exile was designed to diminish was not the person they had thought themselves to be. Subscribe if you want to be there for that one. One question, and mean it as the exercise itself. What is one situation in your life where you chose not to investigate fully, and sitting with it now, was that restraint or avoidance? Write it in the comments. Just the situation, not the verdict. You probably already know which it was.